where every story we share is a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the world, light can still break through. Before we begin, let me ask you something. If you were a young boy with no place to call home, nothing to your name, and no one waiting for you, what would you do if you found a stranger's wallet lying in the snow? Tonight's story isn't just about returning something that was lost. It's about a choice, a quiet act of integrity, and a tear shed not just out of gratitude, but from a place much deeper. If you believe that a strong conscience doesn't require a roof over your head, and that true kindness can rise from the lowest of places, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you're someone who still believes in second chances, in people surprising you when you least expect it, we tell stories that help you see the world through different eyes. Let's begin. It was the kind of cold that bit straight through your coat and settled into your bones. Denver in January had no mercy, just long shadows, frozen sidewalks, and the endless crunch of boots over packed snow. In Central Park, where most people only pass through on their way to somewhere warm, a 13-year-old boy named Eli Turner was hunched over near a trash bin, his breath coming in visible clouds. He wasn't there by accident. For nearly a year now, Eli had been drifting, scraping together enough to survive the next day. After his mom died in a car accident and his father disappeared into the haze of addiction, there was no one left. No phone numbers to call. No couches to crash on. Just the streets, and the constant gnaw of hunger. Today had been like most others. He had already combed 2 blocks for recyclables, found a bruised apple behind a cafe, and now, he was looking for something, anything edible in the public trash cans near the playground. That's when he saw it. Underneath the bench, half buried in slush, was a black leather wallet. Not the cheap kind you find at a dollar store, but the heavy, expensive kind with perfect stitching and gold lettering on the corner. It looked out of place, almost like it had landed from another world. Eli glanced around. There was no one nearby. Just a couple walking briskly by, their scarves wrapped tight and their eyes avoiding contact. No one had noticed. No one had dropped it with a shout. No one had come running back for it. He picked it up, cautiously, his fingers numb. Opening it felt like peeling back the cover of a secret. First, the cash. $520 in clean bills, 10s and 20s, folded neatly, as if waiting to be spent. For Eli, it was more money than he had seen in months. It could mean food, shelter, maybe even a hotel bed for a few nights. But then came the rest. A credit card. A driver's license. A few business cards. And then, a photograph. Small, slightly wrinkled, but protected inside a clear sleeve. It was a little girl, no more than 6, with bright blue eyes and messy blonde hair. She was holding a teddy bear, grinning at the camera as if it were her best friend. Tucked behind the photo was a torn piece of paper with a handwritten note. "Mommy promises to come get you at 6. Love you always, Molly." Eli stared at the words, the handwriting soft and curved, like something a mother would write while choking back tears. For a moment, everything went still. The sound of the wind faded. The pain in his stomach disappeared. Even the money in his hand felt distant, less real. He could almost hear his own mother's voice again, warm, tired, always humming something while she folded laundry or poured soup into a cracked bowl. She used to write little notes too. "Don't forget your scarf. You make me proud. Love you to the moon and back." And just like that, the wallet wasn't just a wallet anymore. It was someone's story. Someone's mistake. Someone's desperation. Eli looked back at the license. The name, Rebecca Langston. The address was printed below, just a few blocks away in one of those tall glass buildings he usually stayed far from. He could see it now, a clean, warm apartment with heat, maybe even candles. Maybe the woman who owned this wallet was out looking for it. Maybe she didn't even care about the money. Maybe she just wanted that photo back. He clutched the wallet to his chest, zipped it inside his coat, and stood up. The snow had started falling again, gently at first, then in thicker flakes. Eli stepped off the curb and started walking, then jogging, then running, dodging people and patches of ice, his breath coming fast as the address drew closer in his mind. He didn't know exactly what he'd say when he got there. He just knew he had to go. Not because someone was watching. Not because he expected a reward. But because he remembered what it felt like to lose something that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, doing this would make him feel a little less lost too. The building towered above him like a wall of glass and steel, silent and indifferent to the snow still clinging to Eli's shoulders. He paused at the front entrance, the kind with polished brass handles and a security camera mounted just above the intercom. A delivery man had just exited, and Eli slipped through the door before it closed, barely noticed, like a shadow. The lobby was warm, too warm. His cheeks flushed from the sudden heat, and he felt the wet chill of his clothes now clinging to his skin. Marble floors. Fresh flowers on a table by the elevators. A world that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. He stared at the piece of paper in his hand again. Rebecca Langston, Unit 14B. The elevator chimed softly as he stepped inside, pressing the button with his trembling fingers. Each floor ticked by like a countdown. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe she'd yell. Maybe she'd call the police. Maybe she wouldn't believe him at all. He clutched the wallet tighter inside his coat. When the elevator doors opened to the 14th floor, the air smelled faintly of citrus and lavender. Plush carpet muffled his footsteps as he walked down the hall. He stopped in front of the door marked 14B, took a breath, and knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, this time more firmly. A moment later, the lock clicked, and the door cracked open. A woman stood in the doorway. White mid-40s, poised in a tailored gray sweater and black slacks. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and her face was sharp, pretty but tired. The kind of tired that didn't come from missing sleep, but from carrying something too heavy for too long. Her voice was clipped, guarded. "Who told you where I live?" Eli blinked, startled by the directness. He didn't know how to explain it. He didn't know how to explain himself. So he didn't try. He reached into his coat and held out the wallet with both hands. "I just thought you might need this." Rebecca stared at him for a moment, confused, then looked down at the wallet. Her brow furrowed. Slowly, she reached out and took it, fingers brushing against his for a second, his skin cold and damp, hers warm and smooth. She opened it, rifling through out of habit, checking for money, maybe, or cards. And then she saw it. The photo. She froze. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled it out, eyes locked on the image of the little girl in the crumpled frame. For a long second, she said nothing. Then her lips parted in a shaky breath, and her other hand came up to cover her mouth. Her knees seemed to weaken as she stepped back into the apartment, clutching the photo like something sacred. Eli stood there, unsure if he should follow or leave. I thought it was gone," she whispered, mostly to herself. "I thought it was gone forever." She sank into a chair by the entryway table, staring at the picture, her eyes wet and wide. A tear slid down her cheek. Then another. "My daughter," she murmured. "That was the last photo I took with her. Before." She stopped, swallowing hard. Before the divorce. Before her ex-husband moved away with Molly, cutting off contact slowly, deliberately, until photos stopped arriving and calls stopped being answered. She never told anyone, but she had clung to that photo like it was the last piece of a life she used to have, until the wallet vanished 3 days ago. She had torn apart her apartment, retraced every step, cursed herself for being careless. But she never thought she'd see that picture again. Rebecca looked up at Eli, really seeing him now. A boy white, skinny, with sunken cheeks, snow-soaked jeans, and a patched hoodie. He didn't look older than 13, maybe younger. He wasn't holding out his hand. He wasn't asking for anything. "You found this?" she asked. He nodded. "In the park. Under a bench." Her voice was softer now, uncertain. Why did you bring it back? Eli shrugged, barely meeting her eyes. I just thought, if it were my mom, she'd want someone to return it. The silence that followed was thick. Rebecca pressed the photo to her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Something inside her cracked open, not broken but raw. It had been so long since anyone had done something kind without expecting anything in return. She gestured quietly toward the hallway. Would you like to come in? Just for a moment? It's warm, and you look frozen. Eli hesitated, then stepped inside, the door closing gently behind him. The warmth inside the apartment wrapped around Eli like a blanket he hadn't felt in years. It was quiet, too quiet, compared to the street noise and sirens he was used to. The kind of silence that made you feel like you'd walked into someone else's memory. Rebecca had led him to a small dining nook just off the kitchen. The table was clean, minimalist, with a white vase holding 3 dried lavender stalks. There was a softness to the light, coming from a pendant lamp above, casting shadows on the walls like something out of a painting. She watched him carefully, still holding the photo in her hand. You can sit if you'd like, she said, her voice gentler now, almost uncertain. Eli slid into the chair nearest the wall. He sat stiffly, like he didn't belong there. His hands stayed on his lap, knees close together. The last real meal he'd had at a table like this, he couldn't even remember. Rebecca stood across from him, still processing everything. The photo. The boy. His choice. She looked at the wallet again, then at Eli. Do you need something? She asked, cautious but sincere. Money? Food? A place to stay? He shook his head quickly, eyes still down. I don't want anything, he said softly. I thought, if my mom were still alive, she'd want someone to return it. The room went still. Rebecca sat down across from him, her hands folded tightly, her thumb rubbing the edge of the wallet. Her throat tightened as she looked at this boy, white, pale from the cold, with eyes far older than his age. Something about him reminded her of herself, once. After the divorce. After the silence. When she too had walked through days like they were tunnels with no end. I don't think anyone's ever said that to me before, she said quietly. Eli looked up for just a second. Rebecca stood again, slowly, like she was moving through water. She walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge, then the freezer, then the pantry, almost frantically now. She muttered under her breath. Let's see. Do you like chicken? I've got soup. Or pasta. Do boys still eat spaghetti? He didn't answer. Because no one had asked him that in so long, he forgot how to. A few minutes later, the scent of butter and garlic filled the air. Rebecca moved through the kitchen like she hadn't in months. Her hands found rhythm, pouring water, setting pots, warming bread, like she was cooking for someone she cared about. Eli sat frozen in his chair, eyes wide as the smells drifted over him. His stomach growled audibly, betraying his silence. He shifted, embarrassed. Rebecca turned her head and smiled. I heard that. He smiled back, barely. By the time the plate was set in front of him, steaming pasta with tomato sauce and a side of warm garlic bread, Eli looked at it as if it were a gift too good to touch. You can eat, she said, sitting down again across from him, a bowl in her own hands. He picked up the fork slowly, cautiously, as though afraid it might be taken away. Then he took a bite. And another. And another. No words were spoken for a while. Just the sound of silverware, and soft music playing somewhere in the distance, left over from a forgotten playlist. Rebecca watched him eat. Not just with pity, but with something else. Something older. Something maternal. You don't have to explain anything, she said after a while. But, where have you been staying? Park, he mumbled between bites. Sometimes behind the diner on 5th. When it's really cold, I ride the bus until they make me get off. She nodded, fighting back tears. And school. He shook his head. Haven't been since Mom. He didn't finish. She didn't press. After dinner, she poured him a glass of warm apple cider, from a bottle she wasn't even sure she still had. He cradled it like it was made of gold. They sat like that for a long time. Two strangers, bound not by blood or obligation, but by a single act of decency, and a photograph of a little girl. The next morning the snow had stopped, but the chill lingered in the air, and in the eyes of the neighbors. Rebecca had let Eli sleep on the small pull-out sofa in her office. He didn't ask. She didn't offer in words. It had just happened naturally, like a door slowly creaking open that had long been shut. By 8 a.m., Rebecca was already dressed for work, her heels clicking against the floor as she prepared a cup of coffee. Eli had quietly folded his blanket, tucked the pillow away, and was now sitting silently at the edge of the window, watching the city wake up. Neither of them said much. But down in the lobby, things were already being noticed. It started with Mrs. Delaney, the widow from 14A, who always watered her plants exactly at 8:30 and took note of every person who walked the halls. She'd seen the boy. Thin, ragged clothes. Not a family friend, not a delivery, not anyone from the building. Then there was Mr. Wilkins, who ran the HOA board and took pride in keeping things orderly. He watched from the elevator mirror when Eli had come down to take out the trash, barefoot in borrowed slippers. That was enough for a comment. Then two. Then whispers. By midday, Rebecca overheard them in the hallway. Have you seen the boy? Don't know where she found him. They'll take advantage, you know. They always do. Sad story or not, you can't just let them in. Them. Rebecca hated that word. As if kindness had to be rationed out only to the deserving, and suspicion was a form of self-protection. Still, the voices got in. She'd worked hard for everything she had, every square foot of that apartment, every ounce of respect in her field. And now people looked at her differently. Her neighbors, the doorman, even the barista downstairs. That evening, as she and Eli sat at the table finishing dinner, mac and cheese with a side of green beans, she caught herself staring at him a little too long. Wondering. Second-guessing. He noticed. Is something wrong? He asked. She hesitated. No, I just... She trailed off. But later that night, as she washed dishes, the question came out anyway. Eli, why didn't you keep the money? He looked up from the book he was reading on the couch. He blinked slowly, as if surprised she even had to ask. I didn't want it, he said simply. That picture, it looked like it meant something. Rebecca dried her hands and leaned against the counter, arms folded. It did. A silence passed between them. You know, she said quietly, people are starting to talk. Eli didn't flinch. He'd heard it before. He'd lived it. They always do. She gave a weak smile, half shame, half sorrow. They say I should be careful. That you might be using me. He nodded slowly. I would have thought that too. If I were them. That struck something deep in her. The way he said it, not bitter, not angry. Just, resigned. As if judgment was something he'd learned to accept like the weather. It came, it stayed, and eventually it moved on. I don't want anything from you, he added. I just wanted that picture to go back to where it belonged. His words came back to her later that night when she was alone, folding towels in the laundry room. She stopped one in her hands, and just stood there, thinking. No child speaks like that unless they've had to grow up too fast. No child walks away from $500 unless something stronger than hunger is guiding them. She sat down at the kitchen island, opened her laptop, and typed his name into a search bar. Eli Turner. Denver. Age 13. She didn't know what she expected to find. Maybe nothing. But there he was. A middle school honor roll student. A boy whose mother had died in a car accident 9 months ago. A missing persons report from shortly after. A court record showing the father's arrest for assault and public intoxication. A note at the bottom, child never placed into foster care. Believed to have fled custody. She scrolled through a photo, one from the school yearbook, Eli in a button-down shirt, smiling nervously. She sat back, hand covering her mouth. He hadn't lied. Not once. And now the only thing left was what she would do with that truth. Rebecca couldn't sleep that night. She had closed the laptop hours ago, but her mind kept replaying everything she had learned. Eli Turner wasn't a stranger anymore. He was a name in the system. A story buried under silence. A boy who had once stood in front of a classroom, raised his hand with the right answers, and smiled when teachers praised him. He was supposed to have a future. Instead, he had vanished. His mother had died in a car accident while on her way to pick him up from school. One bad turn. One distracted driver. And just like that, Eli's entire life changed. His father, already slipping into alcohol, had exploded not long after the funeral. There was a fight. Loud enough for the neighbors to call the police. After that, the reports said Eli fled. No foster home. No shelter. Just gone. 9 months. Alone. And yet not a single record of theft, no arrests, no reports of aggression. He had disappeared not to cause trouble, but to survive it. Rebecca stared at the ceiling. It wasn't just the facts that haunted her, it was the quiet dignity with which Eli carried them. How he never asked for sympathy. Never played the victim. The next morning, she made pancakes. Not the boxed kind, but from scratch, just like she used to on Sundays with Molly. She set out butter, syrup, and orange juice. Eli appeared just as she was placing the last plate on the table, his hair messy, his eyes heavy with sleep. He paused at the sight of the food. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "I wanted to." They ate in silence, the kind that feels safe. When he finished, Eli stood up, grabbed his coat, and quietly said, "I should go." Rebecca didn't stop him. She didn't ask where. She just nodded. But as soon as the door clicked shut behind him, she reached for her phone. She spent the afternoon making calls. To a friend in the school district. To a contact in social services. Not to turn him in, but to understand what was possible. What rules could be bent. What gaps could be filled. By late afternoon, she stood outside her building, coat pulled tight around her, watching the sidewalk like a mother waiting for her child to come home. Minutes passed. Then half an hour. Then, there he was. Walking slowly, head down, hands buried in his pockets. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, heavy with whatever he owned in the world. When he looked up and saw her, he hesitated. She stepped forward. "I wanted to ask you something," she said, voice soft but steady. He stopped. "Okay." Rebecca took a breath. "Do you want to come back? I mean, really come back. To school. To warmth. To," she struggled for the right word, "to something that feels like home." Eli didn't answer right away. He looked at the sky, gray and wide above them. Then at her, this woman who had once looked through him like glass, and now was offering something no one else had in a very long time. "Do I have to explain anything?" he asked cautiously. She shook her head. "No. Just say yes." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes." And for the first time in months he smiled, not just with his mouth, but with his whole face. Not a survivor's smile. A boy's. Rebecca reached out and opened the door behind her. "Then let's go home." The paperwork was long cold, and filled with questions that made Rebecca's stomach twist. "Are you aware of the responsibilities involved in being a temporary guardian?" "Yes." "Do you have experience caring for a minor?" "No. But I'm ready." She answered everything with the same clarity she used in boardroom meetings. But this wasn't a pitch, or a campaign. This was about Eli, about giving a boy something no one else had thought he deserved. Within 3 days, it was official. She became his temporary guardian. Not just the woman who gave him dinner and a warm place to sleep, but someone the state now trusted to guide him, to protect him, to care. Eli didn't say much when she told him. He had simply nodded, eyes wide, uncertain. He didn't ask what it meant, not really. He only asked one thing. Do I have to go somewhere else? Rebecca shook her head. No. This is your home. For as long as you want it to be. And that was that. The first morning of school was rough. Eli stood in front of the mirror, tugging at the collar of the clean shirt she'd bought him from a department store downtown. He looked like someone else, a boy who had never slept on concrete, who had never eaten out of a trash bin. The reflection made him nervous. Rebecca noticed. You look good, she said, handing him a backpack with supplies already packed. He gave a small, shy smile. It doesn't feel real. Sometimes the best things don't, she replied. At the school office, the staff was kind but cautious. They had read his file. They knew the gaps. They saw the absences and the warnings. But Rebecca had come prepared, with notes from social services, approval letters, and most importantly, a determination that could not be ignored. He was enrolled by lunchtime. When Eli returned that afternoon, he was quiet. More than usual. Rebecca waited, watching from the kitchen counter as he dropped his bag by the door and sat at the dining table, still wearing his coat. How was it? She asked. He shrugged. Weird. Weird good or weird bad? Both. He paused, then added, No one looked at me like I didn't belong. Not once. Rebecca smiled gently. That's how it should be. As the days passed, routine began to form. She made breakfast, toast, eggs, sometimes pancakes. He left for school with earbuds in and returned home with a few new stories each day. A girl in math class who liked to hum. A teacher who told him he was sharp. A hallway where someone actually moved aside to let him through. He did his homework without being asked. He never complained. And he never once called it a favor. Because to Eli, this wasn't a handout. It was a start. But something deeper began to change, too. For Rebecca, Eli's presence wasn't just a responsibility. It wasn't charity. It wasn't penance for losing her own daughter in a custody battle, or for the years she had buried herself in work just to feel something again. No, Eli was the first person in a very long time who made her feel thankful simply by being there. He asked questions no one else asked. Did you always want to work in marketing? Do you miss Molly every day or just some days? Do you think people can ever really change? She didn't always have the answers. But she appreciated being asked. They shared more meals. They laughed, real laughter that started in the belly and came out messy and loud. She began keeping a second toothbrush in the holder, labeled E. She wrote his name on the grocery list when she noticed he liked the cereal with the cinnamon squares. She left the porch light on longer at night. One evening, as they were watching a documentary on wildlife, Eli turned to her and asked, Do you think I could be something? Like more than I am right now. Rebecca didn't hesitate. You already are. He looked at her like he wasn't used to hearing that. She leaned over and tapped the side of his arm. But if you're talking about the future? Then yes, Eli. I think you're going to be someone this world's lucky to have. And for the first time since she'd become his guardian, he leaned his head gently against her shoulder. They sat that way, neither saying anything more. Because some moments don't need words to be true. By spring, the snow had melted, and with it, something in Eli began to thaw too. The school counselor had called Rebecca one afternoon to share something she already suspected. Eli wasn't just catching up, he was thriving. He sat in the front row. He turned in his homework early. He read through lunch breaks. He asked questions that made teachers pause before answering. For a boy who had once been invisible to the world, he was becoming impossible to ignore. At first, Eli didn't think much of it. He didn't care about straight A's or teacher praise. What mattered to him was that, every morning, he woke up in a place where someone expected him to succeed. Not because they had to, but because they believed he could. One Friday afternoon, he came home holding a folded letter in his hand, his face unreadable. Rebecca met him at the door. "Everything okay?" He nodded, then slowly handed her the paper. "I got something." She unfolded it. "Congratulations. We are pleased to inform you that you've been selected to receive the Denver Youth Writing Scholarship." Her eyes widened. "You got a scholarship?" He shrugged. "I wrote something. They liked it, I guess." Rebecca sat down at the kitchen table and motioned for him to do the same. "Eli, that's amazing." "It's just local," he said quickly, brushing it off. "It's not like national or anything." She smiled. "It doesn't have to be. It's a start. What did you write?" He hesitated. Then from his backpack, he pulled out a stack of stapled pages. Typed. Double-spaced. Clean. The title on the first page read, "The Wallet That Carried More Than Money," by Eli Turner. Rebecca held the pages gently, as if they might break. "Can I read it?" she asked. He nodded once. "Just don't laugh." She didn't. She sat with a cup of tea and read through every word like it was a treasure map. Eli's voice poured through the pages, raw, honest, stripped of any attempt to sound polished. He wrote about the cold. About hunger. About walking past restaurants and pretending to be full. About the night he found the wallet, and how he almost kept it, but didn't. Because of a photo. Because of a mother's handwriting. Because deep down, he still believed people deserved to be whole. He wrote about Rebecca, too. Not by name, but by spirit. The woman who opened a door not just to her apartment, but to a new kind of possibility. By the time she finished reading, her eyes were full and her cheeks were damp. She looked up at Eli, who was fidgeting with the sleeve of his hoodie, pretending not to watch. "Eli," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion, "this is beautiful." "You think so?" he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "I do," she said. "It's the kind of truth people don't write anymore." He allowed himself a small smile. Then she laughed, soft and sudden, as if joy had just slipped out without warning. He looked up, confused. "What?" "You wrote a story that made me cry and laugh," she said, wiping her eyes. "That's not easy to do, you know." He chuckled. "You're just being nice." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I'm being honest. And you, Eli Turner, are a writer." That night, after dinner, Rebecca printed another copy of the essay and placed it in a frame. She hung it in the hallway between the kitchen and his bedroom. Eli passed it later, stopped, and stared at it like it wasn't real. Because for the first time, his story wasn't something he had to hide, it was something to hang up on the wall. It started with a quiet conversation at the kitchen table. Rebecca had been flipping through the newspaper when she paused on an article about youth homelessness in Denver. A statistic caught her eye: over 1,400 unsheltered minors in the metro area, many of them slipping through the cracks unnoticed. She looked up at Eli, who was scribbling in the margins of a library book, lost in thought. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking about something." He raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. What if we did more? Not just us, but something bigger. Something that helps kids like you." Eli stopped writing. He thought about the parks. The bus rides. The nights he curled up behind dumpsters, pretending the concrete was a mattress. He thought about how many kids he passed who were just like him, quiet, invisible, surviving. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. 3 months later, they stood side by side at a small community center, surrounded by folding chairs, homemade banners, and neighbors who had become more than just faces in a hallway. Rebecca wore a navy blazer. Eli had on a clean white shirt and black slacks, his first time dressing up since, well, ever. The sign behind them read, "The Lost Wallet Fund. Helping homeless youth reclaim their stories." They had started small. A grant from Rebecca's company. Donations from friends. Local businesses pitched in supplies, and one retired teacher offered free tutoring twice a week. But the mission was bigger than backpacks or notebooks. It was about dignity. About showing kids that they were more than where they'd been. As the room quieted, Eli stepped forward to the podium. His heart pounded, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "Most of you know the story," he began, glancing briefly at Rebecca, who smiled in silent encouragement. A wallet. A photo. A choice. He looked down at the paper in front of him but didn't need it. "I used to think that when you're homeless, people only see one thing: your dirt, your clothes, your smell. They don't see you. Not really. They think you want a handout. They think you're trouble." He paused, let the silence settle. "But the truth is, most of us just want someone to believe we're still worth something. That we still matter." He scanned the room. People were leaning forward, listening. "I didn't find a wallet that day," he continued. "I found something else. I found someone who had forgotten how to believe, and remembered." Rebecca wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "We started this fund because there are a lot of kids out there who are like I was, trying to survive, hoping for a sign that it's not always going to be this way. We can't fix everything. But we can start something." Applause rippled through the room. Not the kind people give out of politeness, but the kind that rises from the gut. From recognition. After the speech, people came up to shake Eli's hand. A mother donated in memory of her own son who struggled. A city council member asked for a meeting. A journalist requested an interview. But the best part came quietly. A boy, maybe 10, with a bruised backpack and dirt under his nails, approached the table at the end. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared at Eli like he was something from a different planet. "You really lived outside?" the boy finally asked. Eli nodded. "Yeah." "Was it scary?" "Sometimes," Eli said honestly. "But not always." "Do you think," the boy hesitated, "do you think I could be like you?" Eli smiled and knelt down, eye to eye. "You already are." The apartment was quiet that evening. Not the kind of silence that feels heavy, but the kind that wraps around you like a favorite sweater. Soft, familiar, full of peace. Dinner had come and gone. They'd had roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, with Eli insisting on making the salad himself. He had gotten the proportions wrong, too much vinegar, but Rebecca hadn't said a word. She ate every bite with a smile. Now the dishes clinked softly under warm water as Rebecca stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, steam curling around her face. The scent of lemon soap filled the small kitchen. Her movements were slow, unhurried, as if she were savoring the quiet. Behind her, the hardwood floor creaked faintly. Eli was walking past, head down, on his way to brush his teeth, or maybe just to think. But he stopped. Just for a moment. And in that moment, something shifted. He turned. And without saying a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her from behind. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't a quick, awkward gesture. It was firm. Solid. The kind of hug that says everything words never could. Rebecca froze for half a second, then melted. She turned off the water, slowly wiped her hands on a towel, and leaned back into the embrace. Her eyes closed, her breath catching gently in her chest. They stood like that in silence, two people who had met by accident but stayed by choice. Two lives that, on paper, never should have crossed. A marketing executive and a homeless boy. But here they were, staring down a story that had rewritten both of them. She tilted her head slightly and whispered, so quietly it was almost a prayer. Your mother would be so proud of you." Eli didn't move, but his arms tightened just a little. Then he said, just as softly, "And I'm proud I got to meet mine." The words hung in the air, not heavy, not dramatic. Just real. Rebecca felt something warm gather in her chest. Not sadness. Not even joy. Something deeper. Something like peace. There was nothing more to say. No more explanations. No more questions about the past. No worries about what came next. Just a moment. Quiet, still, perfect. Eventually, Eli pulled back slightly. Rebecca turned around and brushed a hand over his hair, smoothing it gently the way mothers do without thinking. He didn't flinch. She smiled. "So," she said, breaking the quiet with a touch of warmth, "you going to let me win at cards tonight, or are you still pretending to be bad at Go Fish?" He grinned. "You'll have to earn it." She rolled her eyes, grabbed the towel from the counter, and flicked it gently at him. He dodged it with a laugh and disappeared down the hallway. The sound of his laughter lingered in the room long after he was gone. And Rebecca, still holding that towel, standing in the middle of a kitchen filled with a soft afterglow of dishes and dim light, just smiled to herself. She didn't need a trophy, or a headline, or even a thank you. Because sometimes the best reward is simply knowing that someone is safe, warm, and loved, and that somehow you were part of the reason why. If you believe that a small act, like returning a lost wallet, can change not just one life, but two, then go ahead and hit that like button. And if stories like this remind you that kindness still matters, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, inspiring true stories. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay kind. Stay human.